I have that already. Is that Google one? Yeah. Can I have that already?
Here's a Facebook notebook.
Show that to me. Yeah.
And here's a cool pin.
Okay, cool.
An owl. Like,
thank you.
I
appreciate it.
So thanks. Yeah, awesome. So, a disclaimer. So React is a library for building UI. So building user interfaces on the web. And the difference between like a framework and a library is that it's not all encompassing. Like you can use React even with Angular. You can use React with Ember or any of your other favorite libraries. So it's not like you have to rewrite all of your code base from scratch. You can start using React immediately and get real benefit out of it. And it's also, so like I said on top, your front-end framework of the future. It's not really the future, it's of today. Like tons of companies are using React. So obviously Facebook, Instagram, Airbnb, Redfin, their local company that uses this. Who am I? So I'm Grant, junior at BWCSE. I do full stack web, so front end and back end. I've interned at a couple of companies, maybe at Google this summer. I like doing design as well as development. It's like dancing. Also, I'm working on Dove hacks. And I've also contributed to React, so it's really cool. React makes it super easy. Yeah?
One quick question. How many girls do you have for doctors already? No, I wanted, because you have 50-50 boys girls ratio this year.
Yeah, a lot of people have been commenting about the 50-50 ratio. I think it's something, I don't know if Naomi wants to touch on that.
It's something that we're shooting for. Right now we have about 30% female that are applying for it. So our goal is to have it be 50-50. And so we're pushing really hard for women's groups to be advocating for that house and info, advocacy, and stuff like that. But if we don't get even numbers applying, then we're going to be admitting people that reflect that ratio. So we're shooting for that, but it depends on who actually.
And what I suspect is we're not going to get a 50-50 ratio for applicants, and so I don't think it's 100% fair to just for women over men. That's not really what we're trying to do, and so it won't be exactly that ratio. Anyway, so on the agenda, so I want to make this really freeform, and you guys can ask questions, and I'll answer anything about full stack development, about React, about being contributing to React. Just ask away. So I was going to just go over a history of JavaScript, very short. Why React? What's the big hype? What's the big deal about it? How it works. It's really interesting how it works and how it's technically, the performance is just amazing. And there's a lot of cool technical parts to it. And then finally, I think most importantly, let's actually build something. I'm going to show you guys how to actually create a basic React app. And I'll share the repo that has this talk and the source code for getting started. So a short history of JavaScript. Does anybody know how many days it took to create JavaScript? Around? 12. 2? 12? 10? Yeah, so it's actually, it's created in 10 days. So here's a lot. Yeah, so in 1995, that's 20 years ago, believe it or not, by Brendan. And so it really picked up in 2005 when Ajax, asynchronous JavaScript and XML was implemented. And so that avoided the need to have full page reloads. So you can load data and not have to just go click on different URLs all the time. So that's sort of when Web 2.0, as they say, came out. Then another thing, like Node came out by Joint in 2009. It only like became popular like around 2011 or 12. And then today, like something that's recently been happening is a movement towards ECMAScript 6 or ES Harmony, which is the next generation of JavaScript. It's just like it adds a lot of better functionality for, like for example, like handling callback loops or callback pyramids and just making the syntax a lot nicer for JavaScript.
Is that the same thing as IO.js?
So IO.js is the recent fork that was made in December 2014 on Node.js because Joint sort of they had like an overbearing governance on the direction that Node was moving. And so a bunch of like open source contributors said, hey, let's change it into our own direction, so we'll create IO.js. And so that's becoming really popular too. So like, but despite like this long history, despite 20 years of having JavaScript, like it was made in 10 days. There's been a lot of changes since it's actually been created. We still don't really have a great way to build large front-end applications. So a lot of people still use jQuery to sort of just manage DOM state and how applications are built. But it like doesn't work when you're building something as big as Facebook or as big as Yahoo or any big site. And so the real question is, like, how should we structure JavaScript applications? So like traditionally, you load a web page, and then it has a script tag, and you load some JavaScript for the page. But like when you load that JavaScript, there's a million different ways you can like structure the JavaScript. You can have like a single file for every single like module or prototype. And just load a ton of those. You can use Browserify to bundle them all together. There's just a ton of ways. And so the most common way like that people say is like use one of these MVC frameworks. So I'm sure like if you're a front-end developer, you've heard of like Ember or Angular or YUI. There's a billion JavaScript frameworks. And they all are just sort of trying to solve the same thing. And they all use this concept of MVC, which I think is taught in 331 as well. So the ideal like way that MVC works is, so you have a model, you have a view, and you have a controller. So the model is primarily for data storage. Like you can do queries on, maybe like if you're creating Facebook and you can save like the friends that you have for like the sidebar, chat sidebar. And so you can maybe add like who's online, who's offline, and you can see like who's in which groups. And then in the middle you have the controller, and the controller really does everything. And that's bad because it's just sort of like couples everything together. And so like the controller also affects the view, so what's being presented. And then so like let's say you have like a form, and then if you change the form by a user, that'll be reflected with the controller, and that might save like a query, and that might save the model and then also affect the view. And you'll notice that just these arrows, there's like multiple different paths you can go. You can go from like control, view, to user action, to controller, to model. There's multiple ways you can navigate them. And so there's also other paradigms. So there's MVC, which we just talked about. There's model view, view model. So sort view model is the state of the view. There's model view whatever for Angular, model view presenter. There's a ton of different things. And so what do you see that's common between all of them?
Model.
Can anybody speak up?
The model and the view.
Yeah, so the model and the view. And so one of the main things is the model, and that's common. Like the view is also common. That's needed for everything, but the model's like also one of those things that's there. So with models, so like with MVC, there's bidirectional changes. So this is one of the big things that was hyped up about, like when Angular came out, because they had two-way data binding. So if you change like a user input, it'll be changed. Like the view will affect the model of the input, and then if you somehow like do a server request and that affects the model, then the view will be updated as well. And so you have this two-way communication. It makes it really hard to manage what's actually happening, what's the current state. And you can even create loops of where you're updating something, and then you're updating the view, and the view updates the model, and just do this forever. And it encourages mutation. And so, like mutation in programming, you want to, ideally, you don't want to have any mutation in your programs because it creates just a bunch of mental, it just creates a huge mental burden. And you have to keep track of what's in which shape, and you can't really rely on things being the same way if you checked it previously and then if you check it now. And then another thing about models is that they're observable. So you can have anybody sort of look into a model and sort of watch to see if something changes, and then run a callback. And it's really hard to keep track of who's actually looking at this model, and if we delete this model, then do we have to make sure that all the views are not going to get null pointer exceptions or undefined errors when it's deleted. So I don't know if anybody follows Horse.js. It's a funny Twitter handle. Yeah. So there's just a tweet, two-way data binding. Okay. So with the MVC, I like to. So I think I've seen this on Facebook or something. So this is a little cartoon about multi-threaded programming. In theory, everybody just splits up and does their own work, but in actuality, it's a mess. And so I think MVC is sort of the same way. So with MVC, this is how Facebook likes to display it. So you have maybe one action, then one controller controls a bunch of models, and these models affect a bunch of different views on Facebook's site, for example. And if you just look at this, you can sort of see that maybe the top model will affect this view, and then that view, if it changes, then it'll affect that model. And it's just a coupled mess. And so, I think we can do better than just having this huge graph of things that change all the time. So that's what Facebook said, at least. So Facebook's solution to this, and this is part of React, is what's called Flow. So Flow is a unidirectional way of handling changes in state. And so, for example, you'll have an action, maybe the user clicks a button, and then you'll have a dispatcher, and that might change the state, so it might change the way things are stored. So like, if you click a button, then maybe it'll run the handle button click method function, and that will change the state to say like the button is pressed now. And then when the button's pressed, that will affect the view. Maybe it'll like show a new result of like users. And then after this, like when you click like button again, it'll just run the same dispatcher and do this in one direction. And so the big thing to remember about this is unidirectional data flow. So these actions, like they're usually like on click, or like when you scroll the mouse, or when you do some sort of action. And then that action is sent to all the dispatchers, which will handle like what to do with that action. Then you store like whatever event happened, and then you update the view. So it'll make more sense when we actually get to code. But like, so how does it work? How does React work in general? So one of the big advantages of React is that when you're working in React, when you create these components, you are working with a virtual DOM. So when I say virtual DOM, so first DOM is basically the way that HTML, the nodes are structured. So it's the document object model. And so when we're like manipulating the UI of a website, we actually don't touch the DOM at all. React keeps an in-memory JavaScript version of like the DOM, and so any changes to the DOM aren't actually changes to the actual browser, but they're first calculated with JavaScript. And a fun thing to note is that event handling is usually a humongous issue in web programming, because you'll have all these events attached to all these different buttons and all these different forms, and you won't. And you have to sort of manage like when they're attached and when they're removed, and like just how things flow. And with React, since everything is virtual, we can just make one on-click handler on the very top page, and like just one click handler instead of like having thousands for every single button. And like the way that it detects which button is clicked or what's clicked is by just seeing which virtual component is the deepest node inside the website. So it makes things a lot faster, basically. So with the virtual DOM, one of the really cool parts about it is that it only updates the DOM, the actual website, when it has to. So if you're to do something in jQuery, like usually maybe when like someone changes a text input, you'd always reload the search results. For example, the search results like area. But with React, the cool part about React is that it'll actually calculate if there's any changes to the search results, and if there are, then it'll mark them as dirty, and every so often, which is like every 5 milliseconds, it'll re-render the section. And so one of the big problems that you see with like if you use jQuery or something like that, is that you'll maybe often change the view, and it'll just try to re-render a ton of time. It'll render like 100 times in like 1 millisecond, and it doesn't do any batching of. It doesn't do any like diffing. Like this is basically like a git diff. Like what is the old version of the site? What's the new version of the site? And like only update the things that you actually need to update. And like you would think that diffing the whole website, like especially for Facebook, you think that it would take a lot of time, but like what this does is it actually when you create a component, you can create like you can basically test if a component has changed or not based off of the references. If a component is immutable, and so like a lot of components can be made immutable if you just set like I mean this part of like what page won't change. Like a majority of like websites don't actually have changing components all the time. So it'll just check the reference rather than going through the actual like doing a full depth first search. And like JavaScript is like super fast too. So like the most important thing out of this is to understand that whenever you touch like the actual DOM, the actual website, like it's super slow. Like if you ever want to change, like you want to take out a DOM node and then like insert something else, that's like on the order of like a couple milliseconds versus like with JavaScript you can do millions of executions a second.
Do you know why?
Why
is the DOM so slow?
Yeah, why is the DOM so slow? So I mean a lot of it is so like the main thing is page when you have to repaint a website, and so whenever you change like an element to be like delete like a part of this tree or add something new to the part of that tree, it has to like calculate the CSS rules that affect it, and that's basically going through like almost all the CSS rules and seeing like relative to the parent node where is this supposed to be positioned, and then like depending on how big the element is, you have to like lay it on top. If there's opacity, then you have to re-render the whole thing.
Yeah, so it's the reflow and all the
yeah. And like if you change, for example, like a element on the top of Facebook.com, that the position of that might affect every single element for the bottom like 99% of Facebook.com, and like you'll have to basically refresh the page. And so like Chrome does some of like really amazing things that I don't understand, like to like avoid this, but sometimes like you just can't like calculate like if things are going to change until you actually make them change.
And so the advantage of the virtual DOM is that you can batch them all up? Or why is it faster with the virtual DOM?
Yeah. So
having some sort of catch. Is it having some sort of catch in like storing in the virtual state, or like how is it possible?
Yeah. Well, so with like the virtual DOM, so like going back to the search query, for example. So like it'll so when you like manipulate the state, or when you like do trigger some event, like if there's, rather than refreshing the whole, like let's say that only like the last 2 results were changed or something. Like with other systems, like you sort of naively just take everything apart and take the, like, you sort of naively just take the top tree part, just like delete it, yank it out, and then like add it back in, and like that's your new search results. But with React, you can see down to the very, go to the very bottom nodes, and only update the very, like the children. And that usually is like a lot smaller, smaller area of the screen. And so the main part about, like, so as I said before, React is a library for building UI components. And so the main part about that is creating components. And so components are a single reusable like UI part. There's no explicit data binding. So like this might seem weird if you've done web development, like use Angular before, or like things that have data binding. You basically just define a render function, and that will figure out it'll just basically render that component with its current state. So, and one of the really nice things is that components can contain other components, and so you can make a web page just by reusing, like you can semantically describe a web page as something that has my header, and then like a sidebar, and like a main body part, and then a footer. Rather than just having this humongous HTML document. And then when you're creating a component, it's you can add props, which are basically immutable values, things that don't change, and then state. So those are things that do change. So, for example, like if you had an input, like a search box, then like the actual query inside the box would be a state. And you only need to implement one function, which is render. So that renders the component's HTML. So if you could imagine like dividing this up into components, like what do you think would be some of the things you would componentize? Just shout out, like which parts?
Button.
Yeah, the button, the cards, I think I heard.
The charts.
Yeah, so like the charts.
Description.
Yeah, so like that description area. Yeah, so that like anything that you might want to reuse, you can basically describe it to a component. And like, so let's say like you had this, like you could literally just have like an angle bracket, like chart, empty, like closed bracket, and that could magically render your chart. And like that's really nice to like not have to actually know the implementation details of how that chart is being rendered. Like React tries to limit the amount of scope each component has, so you don't have to manage everything in your head. And so, for example, 2 weeks ago I created the DubHacks website, and this was a test of just me. So I mean, I had worked for like 3 months at Civ Science working on React, and they have like a much larger code base, and like React was already implemented there, so I didn't get to build a React app from scratch. But yeah, with the DubHacks site, I decided, hey, like I'm going to start creating my own site and see if it's something that's actually like practical and if it helps out. And like it turns out it was super nice to manage everything and sort of describe everything as components. So for example, like that header, that is like the header component. sections. There's this section which has like moving clouds and a flying plane every 40 seconds. And even the button like shakes every 40 seconds. You guys have like been on the site for a while. And so it's really fun, and it's not too hard to get set up. And so how do we update like data? So like we have these components. So like with jQuery, the big mentality of jQuery. Like who here has used jQuery before? Yeah. Okay. It's like half of you. Like I've used it like for most of my life. Well, like most of my time using JavaScript. Like the first thing I learned. Yeah. Since I was a baby JavaScript developer. Yeah, and so this is something I took out of one hackathon project. And like the way that I used to structure apps, I guess, would be you'd have like this $ global jQuery thing, like jQuery everything. So you basically have some HTML you wrote, and then you like jQuery backpage .click, and then you do something, you change the class name, and like you could have this anywhere in your code, and it's super unstructured. Like you won't remember like backpage has a click handler, and like you might add an extra one, and it'll just and it's so like I can't believe like every year I sort of look back at like code I wrote the previous year ago and just like shake my head for like an hour. Yeah, so I mean I'm doing that like every single year. So like for this like you have this like global $, and you're doing like Google search almost, like doing these queries on very like different parts of your HTML page, and like maybe sometimes you won't even have that like part. You have to check if there is this jQuery thing, and then it's just madness. So the React way, one of the really cool parts about React is so there's not really globals. There's not this jQuery like find my button that has this class. There's just these components that are really super isolated, but they're really reusable at the same time. Like you can basically like if you want like Google's like search bar, you can just like go on GitHub, and there's this project that like you can basically just add Google search bar to your like the autocomplete part to your own React app. So like there's like less globals, which is always a good thing. Hopefully you guys don't use globals. And then keeping track of state per component. So it sort of reminds me of like Java, where you're taught in like 142, 143. Like Java is super object oriented. Like you have my car, which has my driver, and like each thing is its own class. And so like that's really awesome, but it hasn't really existed in the JavaScript world. And this is sort of a quasi implementation of object-oriented UI classes. And then like you also have the unidirectional data flow, which makes it a lot easier to keep track of how things work. And so the only thing that you have to add when you're creating a component is this render function. And so this returns JSX. So now we can get like into more code. So up above we have a JavaScript object. So it's an array of objects, and it just has some text. And then below is JSX. So it's basically like a templating language where you can set it set a variable equal to some JSX. So my HTML is equal to this li with like a div, and then we have curly braces to signify this is JavaScript that you can evaluate. And after that, it'll produce below. It'll insert the text. So here's like a full render function. So you'll have render, and then you can set variables, you can do all sorts of things. It's just JavaScript, and then at the end you can just return your JSX. So here we're returning a div, and then a span, and then we're actually returning inside, so we have below is my custom button component, and then we have my button, and then we have various props that we can pass in. So, as I said before, props are like immutable values that you pass to children components. So my prop, for example, is just a string foo, and then my other prop is curly brace, which means evaluate this other value.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you do data binding without returning the elements? Like, can you do that same thing without like having it return and just have it bind in the JavaScript?
So you have to have, so everything is in this virtual DOM. So you can't. Are you saying like having like other HTML outside of this system?
Yeah, like kind of like for Angular where you have you have your HTML with your data binding, you just move your variables in your JavaScript and you have them both separate. But this is like
Yeah. So that was one of the super controversial parts about when like Facebook first released React, is that like traditionally when you're creating like websites, you're supposed to separate your HTML from your JavaScript from your CSS. But like in 2011, when Facebook released React to the world, like they weren't really popular in the beginning. They were like the underdogs, and like they were sort of booed at for doing this crazy way of adding HTML to their JavaScript. And so, like so for React, you do have to have, you can't have HTML on the page and then like connect it to React, really, because it uses this virtual DOM system, which has all these like benefits. You can do like if you already have HTML and you want to add like some subcomponent that uses React, I think that works. But it'll like the React will only be in that scope.
I have a question. In the case of creating Webpack's website, how is using React faster than a static HTML page?
Yeah, so for the Webpack's website, for example, React is probably overkill because like it's a static website. Right? You don't really need to.
Is it going to be like rendering faster because like you're just basically having components at different?
I mean, nothing renders faster than just raw HTML. Like you can't really beat that. But I mean, React is super fast. It's only like 13 kilobytes, and it made it a lot easier just like to develop, like in my head, when you can isolate things to separate components, and then, for example, like there's a couple buttons on the website, and so if I just use HTML, I would have to repeat the HTML each button and literally just copy and paste it. But with React, I can just do exactly this. Like my button, so that's pretty similar to what I actually did. And like you can say, like maybe I want a blue shaking button, and I want just like a normal button.
And like at the top of the page and at the bottom.
Yeah. So like if I want those two different flavors of those buttons, then I can just set like I'll render a button, but I'll say the style, my So React has, so as I said before, like it batches rendering, so it doesn't go back and forth between like any view model craziness. It does everything in one big loop. And so that is, and this is the life cycle, basically how the loop is constructed. So there's like, you first initiate it, and then you get the props, which are the mutable values, and then you get the state, which are the mutable values. And then you have like the component will mount, and then you render, and then you did mount. So this is when you're adding a component to the DOM. And so you can like, if you want to change something before you actually add it, you can, or after. And so this cycle, this will run per component if you change the state of the component. So that's why we separate out props and state. So props are immutable, they're not going to change. State, you don't want to have state, but for some things you do have to have state, like for text boxes and for button clicks, like selected or unselected. And so that will trigger a refresh. But it'll first do the diffing algorithm, and then if there is something changed, then I'll actually batch all the refreshes together and then refresh. So now let's like actually build something. I don't know if anybody's seen this YouTube video. It's in China, some city, they built a super skyscraper in 15 days. And yeah, 360 hours.
Well, it's like pre-view as well.
And it's like a really nice apartment building. Yeah, I wouldn't want to live there.
It's like using a bunch of APIs and do something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's cool. You guys should check out the video. Yeah, so hello world. So let's do hello world because every like framework should do that. Okay. So actually that's answer. Here, so let's create a new file. Okay. Okay. So first, going to create a new HTML file. Okay. So cool. Then we go. Start a server. Okay, so we have a blank HTML page. Okay. Awesome. So like if you're starting with React, like just getting started, you can add the React library. So I just added. This is also on the React like introductory page. So you can just add React.js. And then, since we're going to use this fancy JSX, that's not real JavaScript, because you're adding HTML components. We have to do this transform. So that'll be it. So those are all the scripts you need to add. And then we can add our own custom JavaScript. And also, yeah, usually you call it JSX for the extension. So when you're creating HTML, so everything's going to be in the virtual DOM, but we still need one DOM element to have this virtual DOM in, to mount this virtual environment. So I'm just going to name it page config. Okay. So then now we can create the JSX. Okay, so here we can create, so we're creating hello world, so we can just say, like, yeah, hello message equals React.create is create. And so the one method that we have to have in every component is render. So here we can return our React React hello world. So here we've created a React component, the hello message. But we actually have to now add it to like our HTML. So usually I just copy and paste this line. So we're going to create a hello message. So this is just the name that we typed above. So we're going to create a mount node. So element by and then so we first grab the mount node, and then we render the component with like this method, and we're going to render a hello message on the mount node. So let me see what's up.
I think you will return transformer. It's transformer.
Transformer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then create class.
Just get elements returning an array.
Oh yeah, so get element by class name returns so this is a JavaScript thing. It returns an array, so you have to give the first element. And then I'm gonna cheat a little bit. Okay, so it's render. They've also changed the syntax a little bit. Okay, so we also just oh yeah, so you have to have the type. So that's why it's saying unexpected token here. So there we have hello world. Okay. That's probably, yeah. I know it's not the easiest to get started, like creating the hello world, but like immediately you can start doing some cool things. So let's make a custom hello world. So let's have let's name the person I don't know. Chip. So pass a prop. So now we can just say instead of hello world, we can put in some JavaScript. So this is JavaScript inside here with the brackets, and then do this dot props dot name. So it'll now show hello chip. And so this is like this props thing is like an immutable value that we're putting in the hello message. And so that's pretty much hello world. So that's it for that. So another more advanced thing, for like the last example, I wanted to add like a basic Facebook comment system. So for that, I don't know if I want to cut it all up. I just coded it an hour ago. I don't know. Do it? Okay. So let's create Facebook chat or Facebook comments. So I'm just gonna exit a couple of these things. We're gonna basically use the same structure for the basic HTML document. Facebook comments. So let's save this in the comment start. Cool. Okay, so starting 3,000. Okay, cool. So we haven't added our source index. So let's do that. So in source, just gonna add deaths.jsx. Okay, so here we want to make a basic Facebook chat comment system. So this is something that React is built for adding so basically like a comment system consists of like the comment area, and then there'll be like an input section, and then there'll just be a list of comments. So the cool part about React is you can describe that like in code basically the same way I described it in words. So you can imagine you have these different areas, these different components, and you can describe them semantically, and you can reuse them. So let's first. So I'm just going to take this as a bootstrap. So we're gonna mount on the same node. So let's get rid of this. Let's say we want. Let's also put this in a variable.
You want to build a chat now? From a comment? From a comment system to a chat system?
Yeah. So let's add just that. Then so let's add a component called chat. So very chat equals def dot. Render something in our chat. So let's turn, so maybe this is like a chat section for Facebook. So this section website because you'll see these data React IDs, and it'll have, like, you can sort of see the virtual DOM system. So you'll have the page container, and then you'll have React ID, and then it'll have dot, and then something, then that's the index value, or the ID for that layer. And like the nested element is dot 0 dot 0. So that's the 0 index of the like parent. Okay, cool. So let's create let's create some chat input section. So I'm going to create a form. Then you can create input, text, comment. Now the submit button. Okay. Looks good. Okay. So you can type in here. It's just a submit. Okay. And so now with the chat system, we need to add some state. We need to add. So what do you think we should add? Like, what state should there be for a chat? Like a Facebook comments system, or like specifically for this forum area? I mentioned it before. What changes?
So you need a list of comments and one comment that you're currently editing.
Yeah.
And then when it's submitted, you append it to the comments.
So those two things. So there's going to be like a list of comments. So that's sort of like a state of the chat system. And then there's the current comment you're trying to add. So let's create some state. So default. So that's default ops. We don't want that. Yep. State. Initial state. Okay. So the initial state of the program of the system. So we're going to have like comments. So we'll have an empty array for comments, and then we'll have. So we need to have the input. So we can have the input value. So that's going to be like the comment input. And so in addition to this form, we should render a list. Actually, we could have an ordered list of comments. So let's say we want to just make this a comment. So we can have a bunch of these, right? So we can, and the comments are going to be stored here, the comments data. So what we can do is we can map over the comments. So this dot comments dot map. So map just goes over every element, and then we can return like comment, and we can have like, so a comment will probably have a username equals
message.
Yeah.
Emoticons.
Okay, so let's just do a couple of things. Yeah, we can add a date. So like we can add an image. Oh, there's a message as well. Okay, cool. So we have a lot of things for these comments. So let's create a comment class. Okay, so all these are props. So whenever you pass something into some JSX, it's a prop. And so these are immutable within its scope. So you may think oh, but someone could edit a message. Well, so that the editing of a message would occur in the chat system. And so maybe you would edit this this array and the value of that array. But once you have that array, you'll just put in the literal value into the child component. So to the child component, it's considered immutable. So another cool part about React is, so with JavaScript, everything, nothing's typed, but with React.js, you can add some typing with props. So right now, and it'll verify that you put in the correct types for the props that you added. So for example, let's say, so we have 4 props here. You can just do some sublime magic and do some multi. Yeah. So. Yeah. So you can also say something is required. So there are different prop types. So the username is a string. A date, let's just say it's a string for simplicity. Or yeah, there's some stings too. Well, okay, all of these are strings. So that's sort of boring, but you can also add numbers, bools, all sorts of JavaScript values, and it'll actually verify that you passed in the right type to the actual component. So we can't forget a render function. We should also wrap this in a li because it's a list. Okay, so we're rendering the comment. So we can return div. So when you're describing a class, you have to use class name. And so that's the class it is. So it's typical to have the high level class name be the name of the component. And so when you actually look at the DOM, you can immediately see which, you'll see later, but you can immediately see sort of what HTML rendered is part of what component. So for this, we can have an image, and the image source will be this props.image. We have a username. Props.username. We have a set the on submit. So this is React has for every type of event, you can bind it to like a specific element. So for forms, it's on submit. For like input, you can have on change. You can have on click pretty much anywhere. You'll just pass in the function. So it's pretty difficult to just pass it to set up a function here. So for example, on submit, and also in JavaScript, we just pass the event. So if you notice, for JavaScript events, when you use, or for submit events, it refreshes the page. So prevent default will prevent the page from refreshing every time. Cool. And so then you can get so now we need to get the value. Well, so with the input, you actually need to check when this changes. So you can type in here, but so we should have this change the state of our chat system, or at least of the form. So we can have here, but on change, and we can pass it change input or something. So let me change the input. So you can change the input by doing this dot. So when you're manipulating the state, in order for React to like do this batching, you can't directly manipulate the state value. You have to use set state. And so set state is asynchronous, so it'll batch all the state changes. So like if you're doing a ton of different state changes within your application, like this is how you change the state. Okay. Yeah, when you're changing the state, like React wants to be super fast. So it's not gonna take like one change and then refresh, like re-render that part, and then you change like another millisecond later, like the whole page is changing. So like refresh again. That would just create a backlog of like lots of refreshes. And what you really want is you don't really care about the states that were changed in the past. Like you may have a queue of like all the state changes that you made, but like what you really want is you just want the newest one. You don't care about like maybe you're constantly refreshing like this visualization or something. It's like maybe it's streaming data. You don't really care about like the data that came 100 milliseconds ago if you have some that came 10 milliseconds ago. So it's going to call this. So in order to do that, it has to be asynchronous, and so we do set state. So for set state, we're going to change the state of the input to the value of text input. So that should do it. So let's try to see if the input value changes actually. Okay. No. Oh, that's on submit. Okay. Cool. So it actually did change stuff. Okay. So this is on submit. When you submit a comment, we're going to add it to the comment system. So let's see what we need. So we need to say this dot set state. So we're going to set the state. We're going to manipulate the state. We're going to manipulate the comments. So the comments, we need to add a new comment. So let's create a new comment. So the new comment, so some data we need to add. So date. So we can do new date. So we can just do that for now. Message. So the message we're going to add is this dot state dot input value. We also have to remember when you submit a comment, you have to erase the input value that was previously there, so you don't like submit the comments and still have the input there. So we'll reset the input value. We'll set the message to the input value here. We also wanted an image, so we can get image. So with like the Facebook Graph API, you can actually cheat a little bit. There's this function right here. So like you can technically get anybody's Facebook like profile picture. Like I don't know if you guys knew this, but like the Graph API is open. So if you just know your ID, like you can get anybody's Facebook profile. So I mean, Grant Timmerman is my Facebook ID. It's like on your profile picture or profile page. So that's sort of cool. So we can just say the image is going to be that, and then so we need a user ID. Let's say that the chat system we pass it a user ID. So user. So we're going to pass, so here, say username equals my user. Cool. So we have it here, we're going to pass it. I'll get my profile picture. So we have, okay, I guess we want to pass in my user. So this dot props dot name. Okay, that's a lot of code, so let's test it. 61. Here. So, yeah, so we actually have to add the comment. So, we can do this. So the new comments will be the old comments plus this new comment. Comments. So we're just going to concat. Okay, so we have some stuff. Yay. So,
Brian, I have a question. So
yeah,
you are submitting the comment,
so
and
yeah, all those are
page, right? But like, does it actually submit to the server and save it as an array or something?
We could have that. So right now there's no server side part to this.
But like, does the code actually interact with the server itself, like using React.js?
No. So React is all just on the client. It's a front end, like just front end JavaScript. You could. There's some cool tools to make it sync up with the server, so you can have your models sync up. But yeah, that's not built in. So yeah, you can see here, like these are just comments, and we have all this data we added. And so, and like, also, does anybody else like know their chat username or their Facebook ID, or want to look it up? Because the cool part is these are all components. So, like, does anybody know theirs? Yeah.
Are you sure 29.5?
29.5?
FED.
That, okay. Is that your birthday? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, this one is supposed to be me, right?
I think we forgot to.
So yeah, so like, the cool part is like, it was like no code to add Ayush's like comment system thing.
Oh.
So there's also like no CSS, so this looks sort of ugly. I'm gonna go to the one I added CSS for. It's pretty much the same one. And it's just right here. So I added, it's like less than 100 lines. It's pretty much the same thing. So we have like, I think I didn't add separate components, I just put it all in one component. I probably should have done like a single comment and then like a chat system sort of thing. But for this one, yeah, so it looks a little bit prettier. Okay, so like that's like less, so you can see right here, it's the exact same way, exact same thing as we did before. So we have like these 3 different chat like areas, and all you have to do is just insert this comment area, pass in the username. So like apparently there's no casing with like how Facebook's graph system works, graph API. So I just added the IDs and it just magically works. Yeah, so that's Facebook comments. Like less than 100 lines, you can add comments. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And then last thing, so React is open source. So like it's really easy to contribute. They have, like the developers have like issues that they mark for people who want to contribute. So like, it'll say like a good first issue if you go to like their GitHub issues list. And so it's really easy to contribute. Like once you start using it, I added some like URLs. Here's a quote from Michael Jordan. Yeah. So like at first it might be hard to like learn like this new system or like learn React, or if you don't choose React, then you'll probably learn something else, but choose React. So, yeah, so it'll initially be hard, but it's really, really rewarding. And you'll be able to create websites in like minutes. And it's really fun. And like, yeah, you'll be able to create like jetpacks and other cool sites. Yeah, and so that's all I have. Thanks everybody for coming. There's more cookies up front. Thank you.